the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Your response to what Biden has done, Congressman Khanna, welcome.
Thank you, Amy. It's a courageous decision. The reporting suggests that the president overruled advice from his own military base. It is a complete withdrawal of troops, including special operation troops. Senator Sanders and I have an op-ed coming out in the Washington Post supporting the president's decision. But I am very glad that we have a president who has finally recognized that this is not a militarily winnable war, that we're spending $50 billion there, that it's leading to more deaths, as you pointed out, of Afghan civilians, and it's putting our troops at risk. So this was the right decision, and I will be standing up for it.
And Congressmember Khanna, we just learned today that Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Afghanistan on a surprise visit. What do we know about why he's there and what kinds of discussions are ongoing? He's met with President Ashraf Ghani.
Well, I think he is probably trying to accomplish three things. First, making sure that the Taliban has a power-sharing agreement. Second, that there is a recognition of women's rights and human rights as part of that agreement. And third, making it clear that while the United States is withdrawing our troops by the September 11th deadline, that there are no attacks on troops or threats on troops, that would be extraordinarily counterproductive to our withdrawal. And my sense is that the Secretary of State is probably making those points and working towards those objectives.
Congressmember Khanna, there have been concerns expressed by some Afghans that even though this withdrawal will end the war for the U.S., it will not end the war for people in Afghanistan. In fact, it might make the conflict within the country worse, with some saying that the U.S., even as it withdraws, should support some kind of, for example, UN peacekeeping effort in the country, given that the war now is, of course, not just an internal war, but also a proxy war. Your response to that?
Well, Nermeen, I'm sympathetic to those concerns. Withdrawing militarily does not mean that we can stop engaging. We certainly need to be actively engaged in the diplomatic process, in the aid process, and we should be open to the idea of some United Nations presence if that's what it will take, and consider supporting such an effort. But we have an obligation after 20 years there to do all we can through non-direct military means to see that we support the Afghani people.
So in 2009, Biden, then serving as President Obama's vice president, hand-wrote a memo to Obama arguing for withdrawal from Afghanistan. So this is, 12 years ago. He faxed a letter to the White House from his Thanksgiving vacation on Nantucket. Obama instead chose to surge troops before eventually pulling many of them out. 2 years later, in 2011, he announced a plan to end the war in Afghanistan. This is 10 years ago.
Yet tonight, we take comfort in knowing that the tide of war is receding. Fewer of our sons and daughters are serving in harm's way. We've ended our combat mission in Iraq, with 100,000 American troops already out of that country. And even as there will be dark days ahead in Afghanistan, the light of a secure peace can be seen in the distance. These long wars will come to a responsible end.
So again, that was President Obama 10 years ago. Of course, before that, you had Bush. Biden pointed out he doesn't want to hand this on to a fifth president. Now the war has been through 2 Republican and 2 Democratic presidents. Also, while Trump had said that all troops would be out by May 1st, Biden says the troops will begin to be pulled out by May 1st. But as we see in the New York Times, we're talking about thousands and thousands more mercenaries, intelligence people, contractors will remain in Afghanistan. Your thoughts on this, Congressman?
Well, first, Amy, President Biden's judgment on Afghanistan has been right with the clip you said. I wish we had listened to him and didn't have that surge back in 2010. Second, I do believe that the president and his team need a few months to responsibly withdraw. So the May 1st deadline that President Trump had said. I don't think President Biden should have felt obligated to meet that. September 11th seems like a reasonable goal. I do think after we have that withdrawal, we need to look into this presence of contractors, what they're doing and their role there, and what more we may need to do. It's the first time learning of it based on the New York Times report, and that is something that we will investigate through the Armed Services Committee to make sure that we have withdrawn. The final point I will say is many of us supported Secretary Austin as the defense secretary. One of the reasons we supported him, despite the controversy, is we thought he would get in line with the president's decision to withdraw and not push back. And I'm glad that Secretary Austin has shown that judgment and is committed now to withdrawal.
You tweeted Tuesday, Congress should reject President Biden's Pentagon spending hike. At the same time, he's talking about pulling out of Afghanistan. You wrote, instead of continuing to increase the bloated Pentagon budgets or defense contractors, we should invest in keeping us safe from pandemics and climate change. We need a 21st century national security strategy. And you signed, along with 50 House Democrats, a letter to Biden from the Defense Spending Reduction Caucus that read in part hundreds of billions of dollars now directed to the military should have greater return if invested in diplomacy, humanitarian aid, global public health, sustainability initiatives, and basic research. So talk about Biden both announcing he will end this forever war, but increasing the Pentagon, and what you think needs to happen.
I mean, the Pentagon increases make no sense. The President Biden's own Secretary of Treasury describes the federal budget as military spending plus pensions. The military budget is 50% of discretionary spending. We have not seen the breakdown yet, but if you're ending the forever war in Afghanistan, as the president pointed out, that should save about $50 billion a year, then why are we increasing at the same time the defense budget? We need to look at where the numbers are being allocated and have a strategic reduction and allocate that instead in the threats that the United States faces, potential pandemics, climate change, cybersecurity. So I am going to continue to advocate on the armed services for a smart defense budget that meets meets the 21st century needs. One final point, we ought to be returning them to where Obama-Biden had it, which was significantly less, instead of increasing it from where Trump had it.
And Congressmember Khanna, I'd like to turn to another issue now, which you've also been very active on, and that is the war in Yemen. You joined almost 80 other Democrats urging President Biden to demand an end to the Saudi-led blockade of Yemen, telling The Nation magazine, quote, "What we've seen is that the blockade is really what's starving Yemeni children and Yemeni civilians. Right now, there's moral outrage in Congress about what's going on." Has President Biden or anyone in his administration responded to what you've said? And could you explain also Biden's promise to end all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen, including relevant arms sales? There have been some questions raised about what support precisely, apart from that, President Biden has pledged to end.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind the administration needs to be doing more to stop the Saudi blockade of Yemen. There is food and medicine getting in, but that's not the point. The fuel is not getting in. Very little fuel is getting in. That is leading to great difficulty in getting the food transported to people who need them. It's leading to blackouts at hospitals. And the administration says, well, the Houthis are to blame as well. Sure, the Houthis are to blame as well. No one is saying that the Houthis are angelic actors, but David Beasley at the World Food Program, the United Nations, have said that the biggest source right now of the famine is the blockade of the fuel getting in. I spoke to the Saudi ambassador, and she said, well, we're not engaged in a blockade. We're just enforcing the UN resolution. Well, enforcing the UN resolution to prevent fuel getting in is a de facto blockade. So the Saudis shouldn't be enforcing any resolution. If anything, it should be a third party. The National Security Council now is engaged on this. We are going to be receiving briefings from Lender King and others, and they know how serious the House and the Senate are about taking further actions if that blockade is not lifted.
Congressmember Khanna, even as the President Biden has said that he will stop U.S. arms sales to Saudi Arabia over what's happening in Yemen, the administration is moving ahead with more than $23 billion in weapons sales to the UAE, to the United Arab Emirates. Your response to that, given the UAE's previous involvement in the war in Yemen in supporting Saudi Arabia?
I believe it's a mistake. I don't know, and there's no evidence to suggest that they're continued to be involved militarily in the war, or for that matter, the blockade. But there are reports, and again, these are reports, that there is funding from the UAE, from the Saudis, and even from Iran still making its way into Yemen. And one of the issues that Martin Griffiths and others have said is that we have to stop any of the external funding into the Yemen civil war, or the war will never end if the groups fighting there are continuing to get support from outside. And so until the UAE stops all of that funding, and we have verification of that, until they're committed to some form of reparations to Yemen for redevelopment, I don't believe we should be affirmatively selling them more weapons.
Speaking of reparations, Tulsa is the site of one of the deadliest massacres in U.S. history. Nearly a century ago in 1921, a white mob attacked a black neighborhood in Tulsa, killing as many as 300 African Americans. Over 2 days, white mobs set fires to homes, businesses, churches in Greenwood, a thriving African American business district known as Black Wall Street. Congressman Khanna, you tweeted an article titled "Why Black Wall Street Should Be Rebuilt as a Global Capital of Black Tech," and wrote, "This is Silicon Valley's moment to prove a commitment to solving a systemic injustice. Together, we can build upon the foundation of Black Wall Street in Tulsa and invest in Black Tech Street." This is particularly relevant because you represent Silicon Valley. Also, for the first time, a committee just voted out a reparations committee bill that will be voted on the floor of the House next week. Can you talk about exactly what you're calling on the Silicon companies to do?
Amy, thank you for noticing that. First, I'm very proud that Sheila Jackson Lee's reparation bill is going to get a vote eventually in the House this time. I obviously support it. And what we need to think about is, what does it mean to have reparations? One of those views, in my opinion, is economic development. The racial wealth gap in this country has increased since the end of formalized Jim Crow. We actually have more wealth disparity between white families and black families. One of the reasons for this is the total exclusion of many black communities, black entrepreneurs, black venture capitalists from the wealth generation of the digital economy, from the wealth generation of Silicon Valley. I met a brilliant young man, Tyrants, who went to Tulsa and is now trying to make Tulsa a technology hub, attracting venture capital, attracting entrepreneurs, attracting remote workers in tech who may be leaving Silicon Valley or Boston because they can now work remotely. I would like to see all of the technology companies and venture capitalists support this young man's vision. Already we're seeing venture capital go there, but if we could rebuild Tulsa into a technology hub that is thriving with entrepreneurship, what a wonderful story that is a 21st century response to the destruction that happened with Black Wall Street.
We want to thank you so much for being with us. Khanna, Democratic Congressmember from California, member of the House Armed Services